Socratic dialogue looks different with different clients. In this interview, Jean expresses the themes of danger and vulnerability that are common to anxiety.
I'm just going to not be able to cope at all.
Okay, Jean, so as we've been talking here, then it sounds like there's a number of thoughts and images that you have that increase your anxiety and make you want to avoid the situation of mediating this conflict between Rick and Arnold, your two staff members.
Yes.
So Rick and Arnold are in your office. Where are you in the office when they're yelling at each other?
Or probably at my desk.
Okay. Are you behind the desk and they're on the other side of it?
Right.
So is this desk, is it a big desk or a little desk?
It's not very big, no.
Okay, so there's this kind of small, medium desk between you and them.
Right.
Okay. Now, with anxiety, as we talked about before when you've been here, you're going to get more anxious the more dangerous things seem, and also the less you can see yourself coping with it. So let's do two things. Let's evaluate how dangerous this really is to you when the two of them are there.
Them yelling at each
Them
other.
yelling at each other, and also we can look at what you could do to cope with that better. Now, which side of that do you want to look at? Evaluating whether it's real dangerous, or evaluating what you can do to cope better?
Well, in reality, them yelling at each other is probably not very dangerous to me.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe how I could cope with it.
How you could cope with it?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if they were standing there and they're yelling at each other, what do you imagine that you should be doing to cope with it?
I don't know.
Okay, so that's part of where you feel stuck then. You're not sure what to do at that point.
Yeah. When people start yelling, I just go completely blank. I hate it.
Okay. Is there anyone else in your life that you know who you think's really good at handling that kind of situation?
Yeah, I have a friend who's pretty good.
What's your friend's name?
Well, I'm thinking of two different people, but Sarah's one person that I'm thinking of. She's a real estate agent, and she's told me that often she gets clients that get into fights when she's showing them around houses.
People actually get into fights when
Yeah,
she's showing them
yeah,
houses? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, has she told you what she does when people do that?
Well, she does different things. Sometimes she'll just leave the room herself. Sometimes she'll suggest that they, need to calm down and talk about it without yelling. Or sometimes she'll just distract them and, take them to see something else.
Now, how do you think she decides which of those things to do?
I don't know.
Well, I wonder, if it might be more comfortable to almost always leave the room when people are arguing. But I wonder under what circumstances your friend might stay in the room. Why do you think she might sometimes stay and tell people to calm down, or?
Maybe if she thought she could distract them or something.
So if she thought that she could be helpful. It might also, I wonder if it depends on if they're important customers or something and she needs to stay there to try to get them to work it out to make the sale.
Probably.
She might have a motivation then to do it because it might be important for her.
Yeah.
Okay. It would be an interesting thing you could talk to her about and find out, because it sounds like she's got some important information that might be helpful to you.
Yeah.
In this situation with Rick and Arnold, do you think it would be to your advantage if you knew what to do to stay in the room if they start shouting, to actually help settle things down? Would that be a good thing for you and your job?
Probably. I mean, I think it's probably what I should do.
Okay. Now, you said a couple things that your friend would do. You said that sometimes she'll just say to people, you need to settle down.
Right.
Is that What effect do you think that would have if you said that to Rick and Arnold?
Well, I am their boss now. Maybe they would listen to that. Maybe they wouldn't. I mean, my fear is that they wouldn't.
Okay. So do you think that would be one response, that's a possibility of a response you could do?
To tell them to settle down.
Tell them to settle
quiet
down. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That's one option. We need to come up with several options.
Okay.
But that's one option. And then the outcome of that is they might settle down or they might not.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
If they do settle down, then
Right. That would be
immediate
great.
problem solved.
Right.
Then you go on to the next problem.
Mm.
Okay. What's something else your friend does? You said one other thing that she does besides...
She distracts them.
Distracts them. How
Yeah.
does she do that?
She just takes them to somewhere else. She'll say, I forgot to show you this, or let me take you and show you something else.
Oh,
Or,
interesting
what about this
strategy.
feature over here that I,
Uh-huh. Could you think of any way you might do that with Rick and Arnold?
if they're yelling at each other?
Mm-hmm.
No. It's hard for me to even get out of just being completely paralyzed when they start yelling at each other.
How about your friend if she was in the office with them? Do you think she would be able to think of something to do to distract them?
Probably.
What do you think she might do?
She doesn't seem to get very upset. Well, she might ask them if they'd thought about it from a different perspective or something like that. Or she might, I don't know. I'm sure she could come up with something, though.
Let's say more about this. What do you mean, have they thought about it from a different perspective? What might that mean?
Well, I was thinking, one of the things that Rick and Arnold are doing is they're writing this joint manual, and they're kind of having trouble with how to structure who writes what piece of it and how to get it to fit together. And so, maybe there's a way they could separate it out differently, or, who's responsible for what piece, or...
So if you threw this question out to them, that maybe instead of just fighting about it, the three of you could look at the different options.
Right.
Do you think there's a chance that might settle them down a little bit?
Maybe.
Because it would distract them in a way from what they're immediately
Right.
fighting about and get them to think about something different. It's an
Maybe.
interesting idea. Had you thought about that even before you came here today?
No, I don't think so.
That just came into your mind just now?
Yeah, well, I was thinking of Sarah, yeah.
Okay. So we've got, by thinking about Sarah and what you know about what she does, you could come up with two ideas that you could try with Rick and Arnold. One is to tell them to settle down.
Right.
The other would be to distract them in a way by asking them if they've thought about things from a different perspective and trying to shift the discussion.
Right.
Now, what do you think about each of those two ideas? Do you think either or both of those might be helpful?
Maybe. I mean, I'd really want to just get out of there if they started yelling at each other.
Sure you would. Sure you would.
I mean, it almost seems like it would be that maybe I could tell them that I can't have a meeting if they're yelling at each other. That I really could maybe end the meeting if they...
So that might, could you link that with telling them to settle down? Like saying settle down?
Yeah.
Would you say that I can't have a meeting, or what would be a good thing for you as a supervisor to say to them? How would be a good way for you to say this? Because it sounds like ideally you'd like to come across how? as a supervisor?
More competent than I feel.
More competent than you feel.
Yeah.
So what would be a competent way? If you were feeling more competent, what would be the way you might say that to them?
Maybe we can't continue this meeting if you don't settle down.
Okay. I'm going to write that down for you, okay?
Okay.
We'll give you the sheet of paper when you leave today. So we can't continue this meeting if you don't settle down.
Right. Right.
And then if they might have lingering fighting even after you say that, because sometimes people can't stop immediately. So what could you say further if that seems to be helping some,
Other than ending the meeting.
other than ending the
Right.
meeting? Yeah.
Well, I could remind them to settle down more.
Mm-hmm.
Or I could do the other thing you wrote down.
Okay, so you could repeat again, settle down.
Mm-hmm.
And then after you told them to settle down again, what could you do then?
Well, I could do the other thing you wrote down about asking them if they could think about it from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've actually got 3 steps you could take in the meeting if they do start arguing. And I'm wondering, from your perspective as a manager, I know it would be a lot more comfortable to just run out of the room. Would there be any advantages to you if you could get yourself to stay in the room and go through these steps? Tell them we can't continue this meeting if you don't settle down, reminding them to settle down, and then asking them to look at it from a different perspective. If you were able to stay in the meeting and try those strategies out,
Oh, absolutely, there'd be an advantage to me.
what would the advantage be, Jean?
Well, for a start, they might see me as more competent. I mean,
Mhm.
I think people kind of know that I don't know what I'm doing.
Mhm.
So that would be a big advantage for me.
Mhm.
And if I did manage to stay in, if they quietened down, if that actually worked, then I wouldn't have to deal with all the other stuff.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't lose my job. I wouldn't.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
And how about, you mentioned other people would see you as more competent. Would
Right.
you also see yourself as more competent?
Well, in that particular situation, I suppose I would.
Because if you run out of the room, how will you see yourself?
Right. Just as a failure.
Mhm. So there's a lot of advantages if we can work on this in terms of coming up with strategies to cope with these things that might happen. There'd be a lot of advantages to you instead of just leaving the room
Yes.
when they happen.
Mhm.
So maybe what we should do the rest of the session today is use some imagery and imagine yourself doing these things, and we could also practice. I could pretend that I'm Rick and Arnold fighting. I could help you practice so that you could gain some confidence that these are strategies you actually could use with them if you need to in the meeting.
Okay.
That be useful?
Yeah, scary.
Sure it is. Following my summary of her fears, I asked Jean a series of questions to shift her perspective so she could develop a coping response. The key analytical question was, how can you use what you know about your friend and apply it to your own work situation? True guided discovery is rooted in the client's personal observations and exploration of their own experience, rather than the therapist giving advice or trying to change the client's mind. Instead, you want to help your client come up with his or her own answers to the questions that you pose. There's 2 advantages to using the guided discovery method. First of all, this ensures that the solutions that you and your client come to in therapy are going to fit with your client's own value system. Secondly, you begin to teach your client the skills to do this on their own.